The following program is a production of Truth for the World.
Day by day, and with each passing moment, strength I find to meet my trials here, trusting in my Father's wise bestowment. I've no cause for worry or for fear.
Brothers and sisters, every one of us is terminal. Every one of us is facing an event that we cannot escape unless the Lord comes again. One author wrote, "It's a time that we cannot escape. This life must end that we might live." Death is expected. It's appointed unto man once to die. However, even though the termination of life is a universal event, everybody grieves when that event occurs. Everybody hurts. Everybody, including Christians. Because death, my friend, is an enemy. It's the last enemy that will be defeated. Paul understood that we hurt sometimes. He told the Galatians, "Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." Everybody hurts. But the problem with grief is many of us not only do not know how to handle it, we think we can. And I want to assure you tonight that grief cannot be handled. The answer to the question, how can a Christian handle grief, is he can't. We can endure it, but we cannot manage it, we cannot cope with it, we cannot handle it. It isn't to be handled. It's not to be managed. It isn't a time when you come to the end of it. What you do is embrace it rather than avoid it. And when you embrace it, you begin to heal. And we all grieve differently. It depends on our ages, our face, what happened, how spiritual we are, how intellectual we are. Everybody grieves individually and differently. Some may cry, some may not. Some may be quiet, some may want to talk a lot. And everybody does it differently. And when I say to a person who's grieving, I know what you're going through, not only do I not know what he's going through, that's a terrible thing to say to somebody who's grieving. We just don't know what's happening because everybody does it differently. Let me encourage you tonight. When there is a loss, how many of you have lost your keys? How many of you? How did you feel? And I want you to know that the synonym for grief is anger. You're angry. Can't find my keys. I have spent 70 million hours looking for my wife's keys, and they're in her purse. Ever gone through that? They can dump that purse out. Big pile of stuff, can't find the keys. Where are those keys? I don't know. We're looking for them again. Grief is anger. And there's a good reason to be sad. I lost something. Did you lose a job? Lost your health? Lost your finances? Lost your house? Lost your keys? Lost your loved one? Let me first of all give you a few characteristics of those who grieve. And one of the misleading books among us years ago was The Key in Psychological Studies. It was written by Catherine Kubler-Ross. It was called On Death and Dying. And Ross decided that people go through stages, and when they come out on the other end, they're over the process. We know now that's not true. There's no way to go through grief step by step by step, and when I got here, I'm done. It doesn't happen that way. Over the years, grief becomes quieter, but it's always there. And there are some characteristics you might notice. First of all, write this down in your book of memories. It's normal to grieve. It is not abnormal. You might kick the wall. You might run up and down the hallway screaming. You might just sit there stunned. You might look at me and say, "What's going on?" You may not know what's happened. On occasion, there's reason to be sad. Go ahead and be sad because there's a good reason for it. And it's important to understand that those deprivations you feel, those anxious moments, those doubts, that loss of spiritual vitality, loss of enthusiasm for anything around you is normal. I cannot make death into something beautiful. It is simply not beautiful. It's an enemy. I do not fear death. I hate it. And I am so grateful that my Master has the key to overcoming it. I've been at many, many, many grave sites. It's never a fun time. Look at 1 Corinthians 15:26. The last enemy, he calls it that, is death. And we don't have to like it. We don't have to fear it. But we don't have to like it. In fact, such knowledge doesn't soften the pain that there's a resurrection. That doesn't soften the pain either. Paul said, there's a resurrection. Your loved ones in the grave are going to go up first. We which are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the air. So shall we ever be with the Lord in the air. Watch what he says. Wherefore, comfort one another with these. Why did he tell you to comfort one another? Because I'm hurting. It's not good and lots of fun to say goodbye to somebody. Look at Psalm 119:28. Listen to the psalmist. The psalmist, in his pain and in his grief, says, "My soul melteth for heaviness." I can't take this anymore, is what he's saying. Then he says, "Strengthen thou me according unto thy word." David, look at Psalm 6, 5, and 6. This is David's experience with death. Listen to him. "For in death there is no remembrance of thee. In the grave who shall give thee thanks?" This guy's hurting. "I am weary with my groaning. All the night make I my bed to swim." He cries himself to sleep, cries all night long. He's hurting. He's suffering. He's grieving. He says, "I water my couch with my tears." He may have written that when his son died. I don't know. I remember that he said, "I can't... he can't come to me, but I can go to him." Folks, let's read Isaiah 53:3. I'm so glad, Bill, you led that song. Does Jesus care? Because Isaiah said, your master is a man of sorrows, listen to it, and acquainted with grief. Grief is a universal experience. And what I would like to know is how non-Christians endure it. What do they do? To whom do they turn? Where do they go? You and I have hope, and hope saves, Romans 8:24. But what does he do? Psychologists who specialize in grief counseling are called thanatologists. Thanatos is the Greek word translated death in your New Testament. It's also the word that means separation. James said the body without the spirit is dead. There's a separation that takes place, a thanatos. Lindemann insists in his work on thanatology, grief work following a death involves three big jobs. You have to untangle yourself from the ties that bound you to the deceased. You have to readjust to a new environment. And you have to form new relationships. Look at Matthew 26:38. Christ experienced deep grief, but by tremendous effort, he was able to complete his mission. Grief is work, folks. I said earlier that Kathleen Kubler-Ross threw a monkey wrench into the way people thought about this process. In fact, it's not a process. It's just whatever you're feeling. But the first thing that anyone feels is anger. And that is so startling to the person that oftentimes they don't want to admit it, and so they become numb. Now, Ross saw that as stages. I see it as just what's happening at the time, because it can happen over and over again. It can happen on the anniversary date, after the person's been gone and your anniversary date comes up. It can happen when there's a birthday. That feeling can come back again just as strong as it was the first time. And what happens is we get numb and we say something like, this can't be happening. This isn't real. The one grieving may take a temporary time out from the present. Start talking about the past and what they used to do. I remember when my grandfather died, I can hear my grandmother. I told him not to go out in that garden. If he hadn't gone out in that garden, he'd still be alive. And she was angry at him for going out in the garden. But she was also angry at herself for letting him go. But I know now what that is. And it's all right. It's all right. And sometimes the hardest one to admit is we're angry at God. And we say it something like this: God took my loved one. Brothers and sisters, look at 2 Peter 3:9, please. I do not believe that God is a murderer or takes people. People die. God doesn't take them. Sounds like he's sitting up there with his thumb going, think I'll squash that one the way I would a fly. God is not willing that any should perish. Peter said so. But sometimes folks get angry at God. Why did he take my loved one? A lot of people get disorganized, confused. My reaction to my grandson was total stun. Until the preacher at the funeral got done speaking, and I started to cry for the first time. And got a letter of criticism from a fellow preacher for crying in public. I wrote him back and told him that he probably could memorize John 10:35, John 11:35, but I wasn't sure. But my Lord wept in public when his good friend Lazarus died. There's nothing wrong with tears. It's God's way of helping us. Sometimes people feel agitated when they're grieving. And one lady told me, I feel like I'm going crazy. I said, go ahead. Just go. Let yourself go. And a lot of folks play the I am sick role. They feel panic, emotionless. I saw Ernie Essery about 6 months after his wife had died. Brother Cates will remember Brother Essery. Annette will. Dorothy will. And I said, Ernie, you seem to be doing better. You're functioning better. He said, yes, Keith, but you don't see me at night. How long does grief last? As long as you're alive. Why would you want to forget the one that died? Because to get over grief or that feeling or that memory means I forget him or her. No. It's all right. It gets quieter. It's not so painful. It's not so stunning after a while, but it's still there. And sometimes, and it happened to me just 2 days ago, sometimes somebody can say something, or I'll hear a word or a song, Sweet Baby James. When I hear that song, his funeral comes right back again. James Taylor's song, because this little baby loved music. We played that song for him over and over again. His name was James. He'd be 22 years old now had he lived. Memories are a part of grief. I don't want to forget him, and I'm not going to. There is no orderly phasing to grief. Colin Murray Parks, who is a medical doctor, and I've read his work, he's over in England right now. He said, most of my patients go to the doctor more often when they're grieving. They have abdominal pains or they have breathing difficulties, And he said in the first 6 months, they really visit the doctor a lot. They're just agitated and restless. And brothers and sisters, let's be aware of something. Studies show us now, and we're wondering about teen suicides. Following the death of a parent, teens commit suicide at a rate 6 times that of the normal. They don't know what's happening to them. There is a normal grief. It's all right. Park says that there are similarities, there are common effects, but everybody does it differently. People cry, people feel depressed, and sometimes they just feel exhausted. It's all right. One of the strangest things that happens in grief is sometimes the mourner will take on the characteristic of the one that died. Maybe he'll start to dress like him or talk like him. Grief's effects come in waves like that. The first time I ever experienced death in my immediate family, my grandfather died in 1954. He died falling off the toilet and onto the floor and hit his head on the floor, and there was a lump there. This boy, in 1954, I was 15 years old, that boy developed a lump right there. Pathological. I didn't know what grief was, I guess. I thought that anybody that got a lump there would die, right? Pathological. Normal grief is long-term. It gets quieter after 3 years if it's your mate. And the toughest type of grief, not when you lose a child or a grandchild, when you lose your mate, because you lose your identity. Think about it. You are Mr. and Mrs. Now you're not anymore. And brothers and sisters, my observation is we don't do a really good job of helping our widows and our widowers and our divorced folks who are grieving too. Maybe we could help if we'd study it a little bit. Let's learn some things not to say to folks, okay? I already mentioned one. I've got to learn my role if I'm going to help you when you're grieving. Now, I don't know what my relationship is to you. Am I your brother? Am I your father? Or, depending on what my relationship is, the role shifts a little bit. But things I never insist on is, I know what you're going through, because I don't. I never get down in the pit with the person. I never say to them, well, you know, my grandmother went through this, and boy, we were... No. Why would that one grieving about her loss care what I feel at that moment? She doesn't. And then there's those folks who, you know, when they visit you in the hospital and you've got something and they say, you know, my brother had that, he died in 2 days. Don't you love those folks to visit you, Riley? I don't know what you're going through. And sometimes we say to the person, I am so sorry. For what? I know now that that statement makes people angry who are grieving. I might say something like, I'm sorry for your loss, but what did you do? And it gets them confused. The best thing you can say to somebody, could you come here a minute, football player? When I know I'm meeting someone that's grieving, this is all I say to him or her. I'm thinking about you. That's it. I'm there. They're not, if you ask people what I said at funerals, in funeral sermons, they couldn't tell you. What they will remember is, was I there? Did I go over to the house? Was I there to help? The one grieving is a lot sorrier than the one who said it. And so people who are grieving, they know they need support. So what I do is, if they'll sit down with me, I'll say, tell me what you're going through. Tell me about it. Tell me how you feel. Rather than I know what you're going through. I don't discourage them. I let them tell the story. And here's the hard part. When he gets done telling you, you have to be assuring him it's perfectly normal. It's perfectly normal. I recommend that when someone in the family dies, it is often good to have a family time to explain to the children what happened. You might remind the children, if it's appropriate, that this person had a time on earth, had his time on earth and had his chance to experience life, and he had a chance to prepare for his death. But what the child needs to understand is that even for his parents, it's all right for them to grieve. Some parents try to hide that from the children. Well, we don't want our children to go through this. If you do that to the child, something psychologically bad happens. He loses his sense of being a part of the family. There must be something wrong with me because they won't share the loss with me. We never let our children go to a funeral, someone told me. I said, that's a mistake. He's going to feel left out. He's going to feel as if he's not allowed to know about grieving. The rituals surrounding death are of huge importance to a child. And participating with the parents in the ritual of the funeral makes him feel a part of the loss. I'm part of the family. We lost something. We're going through it together. Helps him. They don't automatically know if they're very small why there will be a funeral. We try to explain that to them. But one thing we never tell a child is something I heard a mother say about her mother's death to her little boy. She said, God needed a grandmother for a boy in heaven, so he took Grandma. That little child, I could see the fear in its eyes. Well, what if Grandma needs another child? Am I next? Why would you tell something like that to a child? God has prepared a wonderful place for those who love and obey him. Doesn't matter at what age they die, and children understand very quickly what accidents do and what death is. Everybody, even children, have 5 needs. You have to be able to confront the person with the fact that you're there and that you're there to listen so they can tell you about what they're feeling. I need to be encouraging them to go ahead and tolerate what they're going through because it's all right. And that seems to be the hardest thing to teach my brothers and sisters. Whatever that person is doing or saying or feeling, it's all right. And then we need a supportive network of the preacher and the members and those who come by and so on. You know, the time they need us the most is not the day of the funeral. It's a week later, or 2 weeks later, or a month later. They need us to come by and listen. And when a loved one dies, I want us to realize if I were to die right now, that lady's perception of her life would change just like that. Sometimes the purpose of their whole life disappears. It changes. And in the 5th place, I need to understand something else. Folks who are grieving, and however long that is, it's depending on their personality and all those things I mentioned. When that person is grieving, what he's trying to do is make sense out of what happened. And that's a struggle. And there is a need for him to take the time to figure out again what his purpose for living is. That takes time, that takes work, and it takes the effort on our part to get past all the myths we teach people. Myth number 1, grief and mourning are the same thing. No, they aren't. No. People use those terms interchangeably, and they shouldn't. There's a big difference. Grief is the feelings. Mourning is what you're doing externally about those feelings. Grief is the thought process. Mourning is grief gone public, as Dr. Wolfert puts it. I already mentioned myth number 2, that there's an orderly and predictable progression of grief. There isn't. Myth number 3, let's evade it, let's avoid it, let's not talk about it. Oh, wrong approach, folks. Let's embrace it. Myth number 4, cope with it, can't do it, it's impossible. Endure it, yes. Cope with it, no. Nobody goes back to normalcy. How can you expect that of someone who just lost his mate? How can he get back to normal? Never. He can't. It's never normal again for him. And that's unrealistic to expect that. I'm thinking about you. Tell me what you're going through today. What a wonderful friend. And then we have that myth that tears express weakness. Brothers and sisters, let's close tonight with 1 Corinthians 15:55. 15:55. Remember what Paul said? Death, where is your sting? Paul knew what it had. It has a sting. Death is an enemy. People grieve in so many different ways.
If you would like to learn more about God's Word with a free Bible correspondence course, then write us at Truth for the World, P.O. Box 5048, Duluth, Georgia, 30096, the United States of America, or visit us online at truthfortheworld.org. Truth for the World is a work of the Duluth Church of Christ in cooperation with churches of Christ throughout the world. Religion can be confusing. Just a drive down the street and we see church after church. How do we choose? How can we find the truth? Truth for the World can help you. Visit truthfortheworld.org for biblical answers to your questions. No man-made doctrines, no opinions, just straight Bible teaching. Articles, audio files, television programs, and educational courses, all free and available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Visit us online at truthfortheworld.org. Jesus once told the Jews in John 8:32, "If ye continue in my word, then are ye my disciples indeed, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." How can we continue in the word? How can we know the truth? We invite you to visit us at truthfortheworld.org. Bible courses, TV and radio programs, tracts and articles on common biblical questions are all available at truthfortheworld.org. Come hear the Bible. Come hear the truth. truthfortheworld.org.
Day by day, and with each passing moment, strength I find to meet my trials here, trusting in my Father's wise bestowment.